So today we have Jessie Cecil, nurse practitioner at one of the local nursing homes that I live nearby and work nearby. And she's honored us by coming on to this podcast today to discuss our special mini-series focusing on honoring our elders. Thanks so much for coming here today, Jessie, and thanks for being with us on this journey we're going on together.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It's an honor.
So I would just love for you to first tell us a little bit about what you do and what got you inspired to get you to the place that you're at now.
Okay, well, I've kind of had a long journey to get here. It's been over the last 10 to 12 years. I am an FNP and also an adult acute care certified NP. I have been a nurse for 10 years. I've been every kind of nurse you can be. Essentially, I've been an LPN, which is certificate nurse, an ADN, a BSN, and then I went on for my master's. I didn't want to be an LPN initially. I wanted to get into RN school, and unfortunately I got into LPN school, did not want to work in a nursing home at all. Initially I thought that was terrible, did not want to do it. And whenever I got out of LPN school, there just weren't really any clinic jobs. And so I ended up taking a nursing home job actually where I currently work, which is a little ironic. And so I did that for a year, and then I did an RN bridge program, which is another year, so I was a registered nurse. And I wanted so badly to be in the ER. I actually was an EMT also at the time, and so I was just very drawn to, emergency room, wanted to be in on everything. So I did that for a year and a half, and then I was a travel nurse. And so I have, went to California, went to Virginia, Oklahoma, and then the last little stint I had was in Arkansas, and I said, I can't do ER anymore. And this was even before COVID, can't do an ER anymore. So I came back to the nursing home in a supervisor role, decided I wanted to do NP school. And so the role I was in was actually more like a daytime role, wasn't really working with the, going back to NP school. So I went back to the ER in July of 2020. And so, COVID had not quite hit this area at that point. But, we were still all the precautions, all the things. Everyone was terrified. You go home every night and you wash your entire body in antibacterial soap and your watch and your phone, and you take your shoes off in the garage. And, so we were doing all that stuff then. So a couple months into that, I actually was offered a house supervisor position, which I loved, was the greatest RN job I had. And that also helped me kind of build some relationships. So whenever I graduated in P school, I was able to get my clinicals done. Graduated in P school, kind of had some rapport with some of the physicians, particularly the medical director where I work now. And so they had thought about hiring an NP here. I had seen the need for it whenever I worked here before, because these people need someone here during the week to kind of catch little things before they turn into big things. I do have a lot of people that I take care of that have dementia. I don't know the percentage, but I'd say probably 75%. So this is their home environment. Whenever we're missing things and having to send them to the emergency room, having to put them inpatient in the hospital, that's the worst thing in the world for them, because, they're confused. They're confused at baseline. It makes it worse because they're being taken out of their home. And so my job currently is to kind of round on them, catch acute issues, and then unfortunately, whenever the time comes, I have to start like the end of life conversations and making people comfortable and that kind of thing. So that's kind of my role here. My goal is for no one to go to the ER ever. They do go, because I'm sure you have witnessed that, but sometimes they have to. But to try to keep them here, keep them in their home, and take care of them in their home, and that is important to a lot of people. So we really do try to do that. Some of my experience, and I've seen this here, and then I take it back to COVID. Whenever I was a house supervisor, we actually had a COVID wing open at the hospital I was working at. And so, it's like open, there's, 10 patients in the front, half of them were on ventilators and BiPAPs. We had no family was allowed to come in and visit. And I even saw people that were really, really bad on the BiPAP, getting ready to intubate them, didn't know if they would make it. And we would finally allow someone to come in, and they would just turn around. And so that was like amazing. So I come back over here, and we've kind of lifted, the regulations. We still have some COVID, unfortunately, but, everything's not as strict. And so over here, I still see people that are being affected by those rules, because people don't come and visit anymore. It's not something they're used to doing anymore. It's not, part of their normal routine anymore. And so one thing that makes me really sad, because I've seen it in the hospital setting and then I've also seen it here, is whenever people are getting to the point where they need end-of-life care or they're, getting ready to die and then they're by themselves. And that makes me really sad, because I feel like to most people, there's all these things, like even now, just being a younger adult, that are important to you. You want a new car and you want to make money and you want to do all these things. But whenever the time comes at the end, they just want their family. They want love. They want support. And so that's one thing that really affects me doing this job, is just, seeing that. It's very sad. So,
yeah. So many things. The number one, thank you for doing what you do. We talk about it all the time, and I don't mean specifically you, but me and my colleagues, whether they're physicians, mid-levels, nurses, we all talk about the number of things we wish that we could change in the healthcare system network between the emergency room, the hospital, the EMS system, and nursing homes. And there's an analogy that you're doing that I've been tinkering with in my brain for a while and have actually mentioned to a few people, which is this idea that I wish, especially in places that have emergency medicine residency programs, that by definition means that it's a relatively decent sized city, which means that you will find homeless people. And just like nursing home patients, not because of the patient, but because of the system, are a huge burden on the system financially. And I don't mean the nursing home system. I mean, nursing home patients end up being a financial burden on the emergency room and hospital system because of the absence of the screening that you're providing as what you do. Mm-hmm. And so goes the same for our homeless population. And I've always thought that you could have like a mobile screening clinic with emergency medicine residents going around and just screening the I believe it's called unhoused now, patients. And because a lot of them are very well known where they are, and what a save for the finances of this healthcare system we're in if we had more people doing what you did, realizing not only the financial burden, obviously, but the outcomes that it's giving them because they have no reserve. And so, and that really goes for the unhoused too, because they don't have a reserve. And so without reserve, they crash quickly. And so it's not just about the money, it's about the quality and quantity of life for these patients. And furthermore, I think to your point, especially for your patients and your population, they're being taken away from their community, not just their home. And especially when you're in a situation where you may not feel like you have a purpose anymore because you don't have your job and your family isn't around, and etc. I think you can get this sense of lack of purpose, and therefore you're grasping onto the only thing you have left, which is your community.
I believe that 100% that all that's, correct, having that family and then someone to, people to be around, and, kind of keeps you healthier because that keeps you going essentially. So I totally believe that. So one thing about we're talking about the money and the dying process and people going back to the hospital, there's a huge percentage of Medicare dollars that are spent on the last, 3 to 6 months of life. And not to say that they shouldn't do that, but what they're doing is they're kind of, throwing the book at these people and trying to, get something back that they can't. And so another thing that I try to do in my job is focus on more like palliative care or even more comfort care, which is not necessarily, like hospice where you're going to die in 6 months, but it's more like, well, you're diabetic, but, if you want to eat cookies, then, we're not going to keep checking your A1C. I don't care, if you're not sick, that kind of thing. So quality of life is a big thing that I deal with in this setting, and finding, a community having the ability to go out and, like they have a garden club they met yesterday. They'll go out and they're planning what plants they're going to plant, who's going to water them, and that sort of thing. Having that is important, but then also having a medical team that understands that you're not necessarily going to get better from this, so let's just try to make you happy and comfortable, with what we have right now. And sometimes that does look like, well, we won't do any more lab work, or we won't send you back to the hospital, or, that kind of thing. So that's another thing that I really try to focus on, that kind of thing. So,
yeah, I've been seeing on some social posts and things, describe clinics. Have you heard of this?
Yes.
Yeah. Which I am totally for, because as a former pharmacist and current ER physician, when I get a lot of our nursing home or skilled nursing facility, etc., elderly patients are on so many medications, and I just look at them like, but why? Like, why do we care about their cholesterol when they're 95 years old? and people sometimes will look at me like, you're so cold-hearted. I'm like, but do you understand why we're putting them on it in the first place? Like, I think we've won. The point was to get them to 95. So, no, absolutely. That's another thing where it's like that quality of life, to your point of just like things we can do for our dying population, is like, give them quality. We don't need to worry about quality or quantity. We need to worry about quality. And so many times, I think, especially for those that are towards the end, we lose sight of that with the pill burden,
Absolutely.
with et cetera,
Yeah. Well, and it's hard in this role sometimes to get people to give up those things, because before they come in here, a lot of times they have specialists, and, they told me I had to be on a statin. Well, even the recommendations, if you're over a certain age, you can't even run the calculation anymore, so you're out, like you said, it's done its job. It's, you've achieved what you need to achieve. But to your point about, chemo, I've had a few residents that have had, we found out that they had recurring cancer usually, and they'll put them on chemo, and, within like a month, they pass. And I am like you, I hate that. I feel like, instead of doing that, we need to be honest, and we need to offer them more of a comfort, palliative, support, and let them do the things they want to do and say the things they want to say, instead of just making them sicker, at the end of life. Because people don't usually die from the cancer themselves. They die from side effects of the chemotherapy, unfortunately, or they get another infection, or, that kind of thing, or they're just so sick they can't live. The funny thing about polypharmacy, actually, to get into NP school, my paper that I wrote was about polypharmacy, and it was about a nursing home resident who we thought was like end of life, literally took them off every single medication they had. And I was just working PRN here at that time as an RN. And so I thought, well, this will be the last time I see them. I came back, I took a travel nurse contract. I came back maybe a little over 3 months later. They were awake, they were alert, they were crocheting items and selling them because that's how much better they were, not on everything that they were on. And so I always think about that, but it is very difficult sometimes and it's usually the family, they don't want to give up. They don't want to feel like they're giving up. And so you have to have the hard talks, and sometimes you have to have them over and over and over, and it's very difficult. And we see different levels of involvement. There's different levels of health literacy. Sometimes people understand, sometimes they don't.
There's a big misperception I had about medicine going into pharmacy school, and then a big misperception that I had in medicine while I was in medical school, and then a big misperception that I had of medicine while I was in residency and still have. So, yeah, all of us have misperceptions of the miracles of a lot of the medicines we have. It got me thinking about two things you said that I wanted to make sure we touched on, which was this idea of terminal illness, and the other thing you said was some people don't want to become part of the community. Have you ever talked to those patients to see why they tend to find themselves just staying in?
Usually whenever they're like that, they're pretty guarded. And we do make, attempts that, like I said, they're very good here about like interviewing the resident, interviewing the family. What do they like to do? that kind of thing. What activity would they be more likely to go to, but a lot of times they're very guarded whenever they're in that, and I can think of a few in particular that come to my mind, which obviously I can't say which ones they are, but, just a few in particular that are like that no matter what you offer them. And even like one of them that comes to mind even was in pain and was close to end of life and wouldn't even take different pain medicine, like so guarded, like so sometimes I think whenever they come into the setting, it's like they've given up, and it's a very, sad, but yeah, we do try to ask them, why don't you want to come out? And, it's usually just, you don't get very far with them. And I don't really know how to get through to them, and if someone had some ideas, we definitely would approach it and try to do that, because it hurts my heart whenever they, they're like that. So.
Yeah. I realized the two things were the misperception of what medicine can do for you. Mm-hmm. And the second thing was kind of getting back to my point of the beauty of the terminal diagnosis, mm-hmm. coming from someone who used to be an atheist and now is an annoying believer to those that don't believe. But that's to say that you were talking about kind of helping the family understand and deal with end of life, and something I've definitely come to realize over the blessings of my life of travel way too much or to too many countries, to the highest of highs and lowest of lows, is that everyone's looking for the 3 S's, which is safety, security, and satiety. Mm-hmm. They want to know that they don't have to worry about tomorrow. They want to be comfortable, and they don't want to be starving, mm-hmm. right? And there's this fear of death, especially in Western society. Mm-hmm. When you're not around death, you have a hard time dealing with death.
Absolutely.
And so most of our death occurs away from the family, because our elderly is away from the family, yeah. and most of our death occurs in the elderly population, especially when you have a drop in faith. You have a lack of belief of something after this life, and you have in conjunction this disconnect with the person who's dying, and you have this sudden realization that you haven't said and done everything you want to do with this person that you love, mm-hmm. that you then grasp onto yes. these things that you hope and have been told and believe will save them, like modern medicine.
Yeah.
And so I think that it's really important in my job and your job and everyone's job, no matter what they do, honestly, to start talking more about death at minimum, mm-hmm. and preparing for it, because I think it leads you to the conversation of what comes after it.
Yeah.
And it's why that I know a lot of my friends don't like me talking this way, because they don't have belief in something after this.
Yeah.
But because I know there is something after this, I'm very much more of, hey, let's try to continue to move forward, learn the lessons, and help this person move towards their next stage while we prepare for our next stage. That's all we're all doing here.
Yeah.
We got a short run here, and we shouldn't believe that we're special or different, and just take it in. It mm-hmm. is as it is.
Yeah.
So.
Well, 2 things. And one, there are things worse than death. And I know you've seen them too. There's things in this life that are worse than death. It sounds terrible, but it is a sweet reward for honestly any of us. And like you're saying, being a believer, it is. It's but it is hard to give up the things of this life. Another thing, and putting your faith in medicine is putting your faith in man and not putting your faith in God. And so that is hard sometimes. Hard place to be sometimes, because even people asking you, well, when are they going to die? Well, I don't have access to that information. I don't want that information. That's not up to me. And so I do see during the dying process, sometimes you can kind of tell who has a great faith and who doesn't, because usually whenever they do have a great faith, they're calmer about it and it's more of an easy transition. I actually work with a nurse here who unfortunately had cared for someone that was an atheist and was dying, and she actually described, him like screaming. It's a terrible situation, and I'm very thankful I've never had to see that. But having faith, I think that does help with the transition. It does help with those conversations because, we know what's going to happen to us after we die. When you were telling me earlier about your previous interview about the residents with dementia and about, kind of having maybe PTSD and things that they haven't given up, me and my husband recently have kind of talked about, like things that we've done in the past and things that bother you. And, you ask God for forgiveness, but really if you can't forgive yourself for that still, are you really forgiven? And I think that sometimes, different things happen to people. Some of it is not of their own making and some of it is, but I think sometimes you have to forgive yourself too for, putting yourself in that situation or for things that you've done because, you're asking that of God, but if you can't even forgive yourself, how are you going to be forgiven? So.
Yeah. Forgiven is a big word on my mind recently too, which I think will be a fun place to leave it at with that thought in mind. I think God is the infinite. Then you cannot not be a part of God. Mm-hmm. And I think that's maybe like what the spark of the divine is. And to forgive yourself is to be forgiven by God.
Yeah.
And I think anyone that has any faith can take some reprieve in that. Mm-hmm. Thanks, Jessie.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.